All right, the time has come. We're going to start filling the tank. So I've rigged up this RODI line, which is connected to my main RODI system. This is eventually what will be supplying my ATO auto top-off here, but for now it's not plugged into the sump, it's plugged into this cord going up into the tank. And when I turn this tap like this, we are now filling the tank. Yay! All right, I think rough estimate, this will probably take about 12 to 18 hours to fill. I'm not going to run it overnight. I'm just going to run it for a few hours, let the pump on my RO system have a bit of a break, run it for a few more hours, keep doing that for as long as I can, and I'll turn it off overnight and start again tomorrow if we don't get it done. But yeah, exciting times. The tank's now slowly filling with water. So the tank is filled with water. That's pretty exciting. Big milestone, I think. Right now it's just RO, but I'm going to start adding salt very shortly. I've got the salt here. As I've been running on my other tank for the last better part of 2 years, I'm going to keep running the aquarium system's Reef crystal. So I've got a 25-litre tub of it here, and then behind that there's a 20-kilo box as well. The boxes are a little less convenient, I guess, than the buckets, but they're a touch cheaper, and because I'll be using all of it in one go, that was the way to go as part of my filling for getting this up to 1.025 salinity. I'll be adding the salt slowly-ish, so maybe 5 kilos of salt in one go, leave it for about half an hour before adding more, just to minimize any potential for like large precipitation events. I don't really want to have to deal with everything getting coated in precipitant, so I want it to mix slowly and well, and I'm going to have all the flow going while I'm adding it as well. I'm also going to be turning on my heaters prior to adding the salt, because salt does dissolve better if the water is a little bit warmer or up to temperature, around 24, 25 degrees is best. Now for the last few days, I've had the tank full of RO, and I've been running the return and the gyres on and off a little bit as well, just to keep flow in the system, to keep pressure in the plumbing for a few purposes. One, the plumbing needs to be tested to make sure that it's not leaking. The good thing about plumbing is, at least the way I understand it, more or less, if it's going to leak, more often than not, it will leak very quickly. It's rare for leaks to develop a long way down the line. So to that end, I did find one leak. There was a very slow drip coming out of the join between the 90 at the top of the inlet of my UV and the pipe going into that joint. It was dripping about 1 drip a minute I guess, maybe even a little slower. It was really slow, so it wasn't urgent that I had to shut everything down and drain it or anything like that. It was very manageable. So when I got around to looking at that and addressing it, what I actually found was we forgot to glue that joint. Now, whoops. But when you think about it, that's actually a best case scenario, because had we glued the joint and it was leaking, that's a much harder fix. The fix there is either something very janky, like attempting to add more glue to an already glued joint, which you're always going to have in the back of your mind as a very weak seal, or you have to cut out the section in question and redo it, which means a trip to buy more plumbing, and yeah, it's just a whole thing which no one really wants to have to deal with. So the fact that the joint just wasn't glued, it was only push fit together, was perfect, because it meant all I had to do was turn off the taps for that section of my manifold, unscrew the unions to get out that piece of pipe, glue it, which I took very, very good care to make sure I was gluing it really, really well. Wait a couple of hours and put it back in, and yeah, job done. So that was a really easy fix, a very low stress fix. And if that's the only leak that my system ever has, I consider myself extremely lucky, and I'm very happy with that result. Now, while I've had the tank running as it is right now with just RO in it, I did fill up my media reactor with carbon, just carbon, and I have a moderate amount of flow going through that reactor. My thinking there is that right now everything is brand new. The glass is new, the silicon's new, the sand is new. All the equipment sitting in the sump is new. Now, when you have new equipment, it's come from a factory. Factories can be dirty environments, chemicals are used in manufacturing, things like that. Silicon and new glass can have oils and solvents on them. There can, if you think about stuff leaching into the water, it makes sense to me that right now is going to be the peak of that. And when you've got pure RO, it's desperate to absorb stuff. It's very much going to be receptive to taking in anything that it can. So all those chemicals are going to be leaching into the RO at a very rapid rate right now. And I'm looking at that as a good thing, because I want to get that. It's going to happen anyway. I want to get it out of the equipment, out of the tank, into the water, and then I've got all that water circulating through my roller mat, which is good for larger particles or anything like that, that might be still coming out of the sand, even though I did rinse the sand very, very well. And it's also going through that reactor that's full of carbon, and I'm hoping that that carbon is going to help pull out a lot of those chemicals and any nasties that might be present through the manufacturing of the tank and the equipment straight away. So I'm going to keep that carbon in there as I'm adding the salt as well, and right up until the point right before I start adding my live rock and biomedia and fish and coral. And at that point, I'll do a complete changeover of that carbon. Long term, I don't plan to run a full reactor of carbon. It's just while the tank's new. And whilst I will probably still run some carbon moving forward, I more than likely will split that reactor into sections. So I'll have a small section for carbon, a section for GFO, and I don't know, maybe a section for zeolite or something like that. We'll just see how we go. Now, one thing I'm really happy about is the overflow. As you can see, it's all plumbed in and it's running really well. It's dead silent. In fact, the overflow on this tank is quieter than the overflow on my Neptunian cube, and that's even with a silence mod on my Neptunian cube. And so I'm really, really pleased about that. The reason why it's so quiet is because I'm running a full siphon. My Neptunian cube is not running a full siphon. There's an air line that sucks air into the drain. And the reason for that is that the turnover of my old tank is not sufficient to be able to support a full siphon. one thing about a full siphon is that's a lot of water coming down into the sump. Like it's essentially a vacuum seal of water down the drain into the sump. So you have to be able to pump it back up at least that rate to be able to maintain that full siphon. Otherwise, the water level in your weir will fluctuate and it'll switch between siphon and gurgling of air getting into the pipe and siphon and gurgling of air, which is really loud. Now tuning cube solves that problem by having a partial siphon with a silencer on the air intake. This tank, I've managed to tune it with a full siphon, and the reason I've been able to do that is because I'm running a beast of a return pump, which is the Abyss A200. Now, I've figured out just through tinkering that 47% on the Abyss A200, that's its 47% out of 100% power, is exactly the required setting to match the full siphon on my drain. So if I turn it down lower, the water level in the weir will just gradually rise until it activates the emergency drain. And for now, I don't want the emergency in use. I just want to be maintaining a full siphon. I could turn it up higher, and then the water level will also raise a little bit, but that increases the pressure on the full siphon and therefore increases the speed of that siphon as well. So that can keep up, and there is some headroom there. I've had it up as high as 70% just in testing, and that's a lot of flow coming out of these two returns. That even with the gyres off, that's producing some pretty heavy turbulence in the tank. My limiting factor there is a roller mat can't keep up with that much flow. So the current fleece I'm running on the Hermali roller mat is relatively restrictive. So at 70% on my Abyss, there was too much water going down into the sump, and it was banking up against the roller mat and then going over the overflow of the roller mat, the emergency of the roller mat more or less, which I don't want. So for now, I'm limiting it to about 47 to 50% power on my Abyss, which I think is right around the sweet spot for not pushing too much flow through the roller mat and having it on that edge, which is going to cause it to run through the fleece really, really quickly, while still providing more than enough turnover to the tank and maintaining that full siphon on my overflow. Now, the way you tune a siphon is with this high precision gate valve that I have on the main drain line. Essentially what I did is I closed it. I made it really restrictive. So obviously the emergency was engaged because the water level in the weir would then rise well above the main drain and start going through the emergency. And then I gradually kept opening that drain. Obviously it's immediately a full siphon because the restriction on the pipe means that full siphon is quite weak. And you just keep opening it and opening it, making that siphon stronger and stronger until the emergency is no longer engaged. The water level will just gradually lower every time you open it a little bit more, puts a little less pressure on the weir and allows more water down the main drain until eventually the emergency overflow is out of the water and not being used at all, and the full return flow is, the full drain flow is going through the main drain. That's how I tuned it. I did have to tweak it a couple of times. One thing to note with brand new plumbing, and especially when it's been in an off state, is that it's probably got air pockets in it, and that can cause some cavitations in places which might make a little bit of noise. It can also offset the total water volume going through the plumbing as well. So as that air gets flushed out, you might find that you need to tune it in one way or another, but eventually there'll be no air in the system and it'll be very, very stable. And I've now been running it at this exact setting for about 48 hours without having to tweak it. So I'm pretty confident I've got it fairly well tuned. One thing I'll be interested to see is once I add the salt to the water, if that changes the water density in a way that then impacts the flow and the return. I don't know the answer to that, so that'll be interesting to see if I need to retune it after it's salt water. But yeah, for now I'm really happy with it. I've also tested that the bottom intakes are working. I'll cover them in more detail in a future video. I've got some cool visualizations to show you exactly how that works, but I assure you they're sucking in water from below as well. Water is overflowing up the top into the weir as well. So yeah, we've got that dual suction into the weir, which I'm really happy about, and hopefully it's going to go a long way towards helping me keep a super clean sand bed. So the plan from here is today to be gradually adding all the salt and raising my salinity up to 1.025, having the heaters turned on to raise the temperature up to about 25 degrees, and then I'll just leave it. I'll leave the tank run for at least a week, just to make sure that all that salt's fully dissolved, the water matures a bit, the carbon does its job and pulls out any nasties. At that point, I'm going to transfer some live rock and ceramic biomedia that I've had in the sump of my existing system for well over a year now. I'll transfer that into this tank just to introduce a little bit of really positive bacteria and tank biomaturity. I'll let it run for probably another week or two at that point, and then we're going to pick the day where we do the complete transfer in one go with all my existing live rock, all the remainder of my existing live biomedia, all my coral, all my fish, all in one go. So from the perspective of all of that bacteria, coral, live rock, and fish, it's going to be 100% water transfer. But because it's going to be an instantaneous transfer, I'm, fingers crossed, hoping to have instantaneous maturity in the new tank. Now there will be some shock to the system because the water volume is doubling. It's also essentially, as I said, 100% water changeover from their perspective, and it's a brand new sand bed, so that is a big loss of bacteria and maturity. But I'm hoping that my very substantial amount of rock and ceramic biomedia in the sump, and obviously all the rock that the corals put onto as well, is going to help offset that to some degree, and it should be a smooth transfer. But that'll be a future video. For now, I'll put together this time lapse and you can watch me putting salt into the water, which is probably about as exciting as watching me wash sand from the last video. But yeah, we're getting there, and it's really exciting. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you've got any comments about my plan and the way I'm going about things, please leave them down below. While you're down there, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Really helps me out a lot. My name is Marcus, and you've been watching the Reef Nerd YouTube channel. Bye for now.